although there's still lots of questions to ask about Doom Eternal, there is a few things we know, and one of them is the difficulty. They've constantly stated, and we've constantly seen with evidence, that Doom Eternal is going to be very tough. From the gameplay trailer that showed at E3, and even before that at Google Stadia, Doom Eternal is going to be very challenging. It becomes even more difficult when they said that the difficulty played at E3 was actually on the medium difficulty. They didn't actually say hurt me plenty, but they said the medium difficulty. So that shows a lot on how difficult this game is going to be. Or does it show something else? Maybe, just maybe, the demons do the same amount of damage on nearly every difficulty, and maybe they've gone back to the classic roots, and actually enemies change depending on the difficulty. So not their health, not how much damage they do, but how many there are, so the monster count, just like the classic games. Okay, so Doom 2016 obviously did not do this. There was kind of a limit to how many monsters you see on screen, only 12 at a time, which made this probably a lot harder to achieve than compared to the classic games where you could have as many demons as you want, 50 or like 10,000. The classic Dooms could handle that, but Doom 2016 of course was different. It wasn't able to handle any more than 12 enemies at a time, which put a serious limit onto it, and it could be the reason why the gameplay was changed to damage instead of how many enemies on screen at once. But now Doom Eternal of course is a lot more crazy, and it's the next id Tech, and they can do a lot more with this. So maybe this time they're going to go back to the classic roots and actually have enemies affected by the difficulty in terms of their numbers. So maybe this area on the harder difficulty will go against 2 Pain Elementals at a time, or 2 Hell Knights or something. Because a lot of the gameplay we've seen has been very challenging. Enemies seem to do a really serious high amount of damage, and I can't see how crazy the damage would be like 2 difficulties higher. So enemies like the Prowler, as we see in this gameplay here, actually almost destroys the player's health instantly. Can you imagine how powerful they would be actually on the highest difficulty? They'd be almost impossible. Every enemy will probably insta-kill you. Of course, this could be what it'd be like, but at the same time, maybe the damage is not changed at all, and it's just the enemies. That's just a theory, but there's one thing that's apparently been confirmed, or at least there's a rumour going around, that there's going to be 2 difficulties higher and 2 difficulties lower than the medium difficulty. That leaves us with 5 options. So maybe they've gone back to the classic roots, where you have the I'm too young to die, I'm a wimp, hurt me plenty, ultra violence, and nightmare. So that means in Doom 2016, of course, we only had 1 difficulty underneath hurt me plenty, but in this game we can have 2. So that means they're bringing back one of the old difficulties, but at the same time there was 3 difficulties higher than hurt me plenty in Doom 2016. You had ultra violence, nightmare, and of course the brand new mode, ultra nightmare. But apparently there's only 2 modes above this difficulty, which leaves only spots for ultra violence and nightmare. The real question is, have they got rid of the nightmare idea, or will the nightmare still be here but actually just known as regular nightmare, not ultra nightmare? Or maybe, I'm pretty sure they still want to keep the idea of ultra nightmare, but they probably just changed it up a little bit. Because when you look at the original games, obviously nightmare was the crazy difficulty that you only played literally just to mess around with. Everyone else played on ultra violence, because the nightmare difficulty was just intended to be a joke. So maybe that's going to be the same thing in Doom Eternal. The nightmare difficulty is just going to be absolutely ridiculous, where you only got 1 life to get all the way to the end of Doom Eternal. Just like ultra nightmare would have been, but this time of course there's no nightmare difficulty in between. And the reason I might not need this nightmare difficulty is because, once again, the enemies do not change in their damage and health. It's only the amount of enemies that change between difficulties. So if you look at the classic games, ultra violence is where it stopped. When you played nightmare, there wasn't even more enemies, it was just ultra violence. And then nightmare was in particular just changing how fast the enemies were and how fast they could shoot, and of course respawning enemies. Maybe that's going to be the same in Doom Eternal, not with necessarily respawning enemies, but the nightmare difficulty is going to be the one that absolutely makes it ridiculous, with the 1 life extra damage, using the amount of enemies that would appear in ultra violence. At least that's just my take on this. There's one thing that we can learn from the gameplay, Doom Eternal is going to be probably, or maybe, one of the hardest official Doom games yet. Obviously, you've got stuff like Plutonia, which takes the lead most of the time, but Doom Eternal is definitely going to be pushing that limit because it's the first game that actually forces you to have one-ups in the game because it's so difficult. Because you're going to likely die multiple times in a level, you need to have one-ups, and I'm pretty confident that the highest difficulties will not have these one-ups. Maybe even Ultra Violence do not have this. It might just be a Hurt Me Plenty and lower difficulty thing. And as soon as you get above that, you only got one life to get through the game. Of course, unless you're playing on Ultra Violence, then you probably have one life per level, not per game, because that would just be absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, that's just my theory. I think that this time the enemy count is going to change, and maybe the enemy behaviour, but not the difficulty and the health and damage they do. It's just going to be the enemy count. And of course, when it gets to Nightmare, that's when you get the ridiculous one life mode where the enemies are probably much stronger and much more powerful. Hopefully we find out some more at QuakeCon, at least that way we know which the difficulties will be and how it will be affected. But there is one thing that we definitely know: Doom Eternal is going to be a tough game, and it's going to take a lot of practicing even for Doom 2016 veterans to get used to. I'm looking forward to it, definitely looking forward to the challenge. I know it's going to be real tough, but it's going to be worth it. So anyway, what do you think of the difficulty settings? Do you think it's to be similar to Doom 2016? Or do you think they're going back to more of a classic route like the whole game seems to be going for at the minute? Let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.